The fall of Jerusalem, when God turned away. In 5888 BC, 75,000 people lived behind the most secure walls of the ancient world. 18 months later, only 10,000 were still alive. How could that be possible? Jerusalem had 12-meter-high walls, food supplies for years, skilled soldiers, and, as they believed, the protection of the Almighty Himself. Yet, within less than 2 years, the city was erased from existence. The secret wasn't brute force, it was strategy, because King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon didn't attack like other conquerors. He followed a method, a calculated, scientific approach to destruction that's still studied by military historians today. His army, over 180,000 men strong, was a machine of precision. They were trained not just to fight, but to erase civilizations. Prophet Jeremiah described them as a storm from the north, devouring everything in their path. Babylon's siege weapons were terrifying. Catapults that hurled 90-kilogram stones over 200 meters, battering rams heavier than 20 oxen that smashed bronze gates like dry twigs, and siege towers taller than 10-story buildings. Nebuchadnezzar had turned war into science and destruction into art. But why would such a powerful empire spend years chasing a small, poor city like Jerusalem? The answer lies on the map. Jerusalem stood on the road connecting Babylon and Egypt, the two superpowers of the age. Whoever controlled Jerusalem controlled the trade routes between continents. And Jerusalem had allied itself with Egypt, Babylon's greatest enemy. Nebuchadnezzar knew that as long as Jerusalem stood, Egypt had a foothold on his frontier, a dagger pointed at Babylon's back. And there was something else: pride. While other nations bowed before Babylon, the people of Jerusalem said, "Our God is greater than any army." To Nebuchadnezzar, this wasn't just war, it was a challenge to his power and his gods. So he began his conquest with cunning rather than swords. In 605 BC, he surrounded Jerusalem, but didn't attack. Instead, he offered peace. "Send me a few noble young men to be educated in Babylon, and your city will remain safe." King Jehoiakim accepted. It sounded like a good deal. Among those taken were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the brightest minds of Jerusalem. But this was no act of mercy. It was psychological warfare. By taking the young elites, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just removing hostages. He was stealing Jerusalem's future leaders. Without realizing it, Jehoiakim had surrendered the next generation. Jerusalem had lost its independence without a single arrow fired. Years later, when Jehoiakim rebelled, Babylon returned, this time with fury. The city fell within days. The king was taken captive, along with 10,000 of Jerusalem's strongest, wisest, and most skilled people, leaving behind only farmers and the poor. Among the captives was the prophet Ezekiel, who would later describe the horror in detail. For over a decade, Jerusalem became a shadow of itself, ruled by a puppet king named Zedekiah. But then, in 588 BC, Zedekiah made the mistake that sealed Jerusalem's fate. Under pressure from his people and false promises from Egypt, he rebelled against Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's response was merciless. He marched on Jerusalem one last time, not for tribute, not for surrender, but for annihilation. He built siege walls around the entire city, a city now trapped within another city. No one could enter or leave. Day after day, month after month, famine began to consume the people inside. At first, they rationed food. Then they boiled leather sandals to survive. Finally, they resorted to the unthinkable, eating their own children. The Book of Lamentations records it with haunting sorrow. "Compassionate women have cooked their own children. They became food during the destruction of my people." 18 months of starvation and despair passed. Jerusalem's mighty walls began to crumble, not from Babylon's machines, but from hunger and hopelessness. Then, one night, it happened. A small crack appeared in the northern wall. just wide enough for 10 soldiers to pass. The Babylonians stormed in. Chaos erupted. Zedekiah tried to flee but was captured. And what came next was one of the darkest moments in the Bible. Nebuchadnezzar forced Zedekiah to watch as his sons, the princes of Judah, were executed before his eyes. Then his eyes were gouged out so that the last thing he ever saw was the death of his own children. Bound in bronze chains, Zedekiah was dragged to Babylon, blind, broken, and defeated. But Nebuchadnezzar wasn't done yet. He turned his fury toward the Temple of Solomon, the Sacred Heart of Israel. It wasn't just a building. It was the symbol of God's presence among his people. Destroying it meant proving that Israel's God had abandoned them. The Babylonians looted every treasure: gold, silver, bronze, 600 tons of precious metal. Then they set fire to the temple. The flames burned for 3 days, visible from 50 kilometers away. Everything that once represented holiness and glory turned into ash. Even the Holy of Holies, the most sacred place on earth, was consumed by fire. As the smoke rose into the sky, it was as if the last prayer of Jerusalem vanished with it. Then came the final horror. For 3 days, the soldiers were allowed to do whatever they pleased. Women were violated, children enslaved, nobles executed, and the survivors chained and dragged to Babylon. Lamentations 1:16 says, "For these things I weep. My eyes flow with tears, for my Comforter is far from me." Jerusalem, once called the city of God, became a silent wasteland. The prophet mourned, "How lonely lies the city that was once full of people." In just 2 years, Nebuchadnezzar had erased 1,000 years of history. No kingdom, no temple, no people left to fight. Jerusalem was gone. But one question still echoed through eternity. Why did God allow this to happen to his own people? Perhaps the answer lies not in Babylon's strength, but in Jerusalem's pride. Because sometimes the fall of a city is not a punishment from man, but a consequence of forgetting God. If you believe justice always comes, even when delayed, comment "God is just" and show your faith. And click the video on your screen to discover how life was inside Nineveh, the city that defied heaven itself,